Hello, hello, and how are you, everybody? Sorry about that. I just amuse myself. Do you amuse yourself? Sometimes it's a good idea because the rest of the world is not amusing you. So you've got to have something to laugh about. So you're here. So am I. We made it. It's Wednesday here at the moment, but that doesn't matter. Um, I'm reading Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling, and what you can see in the background behind me is a photograph of Rudyard Kipling's study, which is the room in the house where he wrote this book and some of his other ones. In fact, from this house, you can see the hill that he uses as Pook's Hill in the story. He talks, we heard in the first chapter, which we read last time, that the children went down, could hear the mill on the stream. That's because at Bateman's house, Bateman's, which is the house that Rudyard Kipling had in East Sussex, I think it is, there is a mill, a small mill on the river there, which is just below where the house is, just below the lawns. It's on the property. So he very much incorporated a lot of what was real around him into what he was writing some of the time. Puck of Pook's Hill. It's a story about two children, Dan and Una, who accidentally summon Puck. Puck that you've heard of in A Midsummer Night's Dream. That Puck. And he gives them a guided tour of parts of English history, either telling the stories himself or, as we will find out as we read, some of the characters that he's talking about telling the story. So a lot of it's based on real English history, but it's a fantasized version of it. So we shall read. And in case you're wondering, hi, I'm Jev. I live in New Zealand, hence Jev NZ. And I read old-fashioned children's stories, which are great for having someone talking in the background when you're working, but you don't want to actually have a real person there that you have to respond to, or listening to as a bedtime story, whatever. So I hope you've got something to drink. For me, I make sure I have some water so I don't get too dehydrated, maybe something to snack on, which I don't have this time, and somewhere comfortable to sit. So if you have, you sit back and I shall read. We will carry on with chapter 2 of Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling. Now, I didn't quite finish correctly last time. Last time started with a poem, then had a story, and then it was meant to end with a poem, but I didn't realise because the format of the ebook that I was using. But I will actually read that poem to you now, which is effectively the end of the last chapter that we had last time. So the children had been given a leaf of oak, ash, and thorn to chew on before they left him, by Puck, to chew on before they left him. And then they had seen their father, and he was asking them what they've been doing, and they said that they'd been doing their play. He said, how did it go? They said it went well, but they didn't remember much about it. They'd gone to sleep. And they were quite forgetful. And so father says, but why are you chewing leaves at your time of life, daughter? For fun? No, it was for something. I can't exactly remember, said Una. And neither of them could till, and this is the bit that I missed, the next poem, which is actually, it's written as a poem, but it's a song, a tree song. Of all the trees that grow so fair, old England to adorn, greater are none beneath the sun than oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all of a midsummer morn. Surely we sing no little thing in oak and ash and thorn. Oak of the clay lived many a day, or ever Ennius began. Ash of the loam was a lady at home when Brute was an outlaw man. That's like Brutus. Thorn of the down saw new Troy town, from which was London born. Witness hereby the ancient tree of oak and ash and thorn, yew that is old in the churchyard mould. He breedeth a mighty bow. yew was a wood used for bows. Alder for shoes do wise men choose, and beech for cups also. But when ye have killed, and your bowl is spilled, and your shoes are clean outworn, back ye must speed for all that ye need to oak and ash and thorn. Elim she hateth mankind, and waiteth till every gust be laid, to drop a limb on the head of him that anyway trusts her shade. I'm not sure what Elim is, Ellum. You can write that down and look it up for later. But whether a lad be sober or sad, or mellow with ale from the horn, he will take no wrong when he lieth along 'neath oak and ash and thorn. Oh, do not tell the priest our plight, or he would call it a sin, but we have been out in the woods all night, a conjuring summer in. And we bring you news by word of mouth, good news for cattle and corn, for now is the sun come up from the south, with oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all of a midsummer morn. England shall bide till judgment tide, by oak and ash and thorn. So there you go, that's the poem or song at the end of the first chapter. And now we get the second chapter, so I will read the proper reading that I'm going to be reading today. Young Men at the Manor. So this is Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling, Chapter 2, Young Men at the Manor. They were fishing a few days later in the bed of the brook that for centuries had cut deep into the soft valley soil. The trees closing overhead made long tunnels through which the sunshine worked in blobs and patches. Down in the tunnels were bars of sand and gravel, old roots and trunks covered with moss or painted red by the irony water. Foxgloves growing lean and pale towards the light, clumps of fern and thirsty shy flowers who could not live away from moisture and shade. In the pools you could see the wave thrown up by the trouts as they charged hither and yon, and the pools were joined to each other, except in flood time when all was one brown rush, by sheets of thin, broken water that poured themselves chuckling round the darkness of the next bend. This was one of the children's most secret hunting grounds, and their particular friend, old Hobden, the hedger, had shown them how to use it. Except for the click of a rod hitting a low willow, or a swish and tussle among the young ash leaves as a line hung up for a minute, nobody in the hot pasture could have guessed what game was going on among the trout below the banks. "We've got half a dozen," said Dan after a warm, wet hour. "I vote we go up to Stony Bay and try Long Pool." Anyone think that Rudyard Kipling might have liked fishing for trout? Una nodded. Most of her talk was by nods, and they crept from the gloom of the tunnels towards the tiny weir that turns the brook into the mill stream. Here the banks are low and bare, and the glare of the afternoon sun on the long pool below the weir makes your eyes ache. When they were in the open, they nearly fell down with astonishment. A huge grey horse, whose tail hairs crinkled the glassy water, was drinking in the pool, and the ripples about his muzzle flashed like melted gold. Excuse me. Burping. On his back sat an old white-haired man dressed in a loose, glimmery gown of chain mail. He was bareheaded, and a nut-shaped iron helmet hung at his saddle-bow. His reins were of red leather 5 or 6 inches deep, scalloped at the edges, and his high padded saddle with its red girths was held fore and aft by a red leather breastband and crupper. "Look," said Una, as though Dan were not staring his very eyes out, "it's like the picture in your room, Sir Isumbras of the Ford." The rider turned toward them, and his thin, long face was just as sweet and gentle as that of the knight who carries the children in that picture. "They should be here now, Sir Richard," said Puck's deep voice among the willow herb. "They are here," the knight said, and he smiled at Dan with the string of trouts in his hand. "There seems no great change in boys since mine fished this water." "If your horse has drunk, we shall be more at ease in the ring," said Puck, and he nodded to the children as though he had never magicked away their memories a week before. The great horse turned and hoisted himself into the pasture with a kick, and a scramble that tore the clods down rattling. "Your pardon," said Sir Richard to Dan. "When these lands were mine, I never loved the mounted men that mountain. These lands were mine, I never loved that mounted men should cross the brook except by the paved ford. But my swallow here was thirsty, and I wished you to meet her." So he didn't like horses wrecking the banks of his streams, but he was being kind to his particular horse. "We're very glad you've come, sir," said Dan. "It doesn't matter in the least about the banks." He trotted across the pasture on the sword side of the mighty horse, and it was a mighty iron-handled sword that swung from Sir Richard's belt. Una walked behind with Puck. She remembered everything now. "I'm sorry about the leaves," he said, "but it would never have done if you had gone home and told, would it?" "I suppose not," said Una. "But you said that all the fair people of the hills had left England." "So they have, but I told you that you should come and go and look and know, didn't I? The knight isn't a fairy. He is Sir Richard Dallingridge, a very old friend of mine. He came over with William the Conqueror, and he wants to see you particularly." "What for?" said Una. "On account of your great wisdom and learning," Puck replied, without a twinkle. "Us?" said Una. "Why, I don't know my 9 times, not to say it dodging. And Dan makes the most awful mess of fractions. He can't mean us." "Una," Dan called back, "Sir Richard says he's going to tell what happened to Welland's sword. He's got it. Isn't it splendid?" "Nay, nay," said Sir Richard, dismounting as they reached the ring in the bend of the mill stream bank. "It is you that must tell me, for I hear the youngest child in our England today is as wise as our wisest clerk." He slipped the bit out of Swallow's mouth, dropped the ruby-red reins over his head, and the wise horse moved off to graze. Sir Richard, they noticed he limped a little, unslung his great sword. "That's it," Dan whispered to Una. "This is the sword that Brother Hugh had from Wayland Smith," Sir Richard said. "Once he gave it to me, but I would not take it. But at the last it became mine after such a fight as never christened man fought. See," he half drew it from its sheath and turned it before them. On either side, just below the handle, where the runic letters shivered as though they were alive, were 2 deep gouges in the dull, deadly steel. "Now what thing made those?" said he. "I know not, but you perhaps can say." "Tell them all the tale, Sir Richard," said Puck. "It concerns their land somewhat." "Yes, from the very beginning," Una pleaded, for the knight's good face and the smile on it more than ever reminded her of Sir Isumbras at the ford. That's from the picture on the wall in the room. They settled down to listen. Itchies. Right, carrying on. They settled down to listen, Sir Richard bareheaded in the sunshine, dandling the sword in both hands, while the grey horse cropped outside the ring and the helmet on the saddlebow clinged softly each time he jerked his head, pulling off the tufts of grass with his teeth. The horse. "From the beginning, then," Sir Richard said, "since it concerns your land, I will tell the tale. When our Duke came out of Normandy to take his England, great knights, have ye heard, came and strove hard to serve the Duke, because he promised them lands here, and small knights followed the great ones. My folk in Normandy were poor, but a great knight, Ingerard of the Eagle, Ingenulf de Aquila, that's his other way of saying his name, who was kin to my father, followed the Earl of Mortain, who followed William the Duke, and I followed de Aquila. Yes, with 30 men at arms out of my father's house, and a new sword, I set out to conquer England 3 days after I was made a knight. I did not then know that England would conquer me. We went up to St. Lache with the rest, a very great host of us." "Does that mean the Battle of Hastings, 1066? Una whispered, and Puck nodded so as not to interrupt. "At St. Lache over the hill yonder. He pointed southeastward towards Fairlight. We found Harold's men. So, Sir Richard is using the names that the Normans had for places, not the English names for them. That's why they're different. So, I will just put my mouse in the right place here in case I need it. Here we go. Carrying on. We found Harold's men. We fought. At the day's end they ran. My men went with de Aquiles to chase and plunder, and in that chase Engerard of the Eagle was slain, and his son Gilbert took his banner and his men forward. This I did not know till after, for Swallow here was cut in the flank. So I stayed to wash the wound at a brook by a thorn. There a single Saxon cried out to me in French, and we fought together. I should have known his voice, but we fought together. For a long time neither had any advantage, till by pure ill fortune his foot slipped, and his sword flew from his hand. Now I had but newly been made knight, and wished above all to be courteous and fame-worthy. So I forbore to strike, and bade him get his sword again. "A plague on my sword," said he. It has lost me my first fight. You have spared my life. Take my sword." He held it out to me, but as I stretched my hand, the sword groaned like a stricken man, and I leapt back, crying, "Sorcery!" The children looked at the sword as though it might speak again. Suddenly a clump of Saxons ran out upon me, and seeing a Norman alone, would have killed me, but my Saxon cried out that I was his prisoner, and beat them off. Thus, see you, he saved my life. He put me on my horse, and led me through the woods 10 long miles to this valley. "To here, do you mean?" said Una. "To this very valley. We came in by the lower ford under the King's Hill yonder." He pointed eastward, where the valley widens. "And was that Saxon Hugh the novice?" Dan asked. "Yes, and more than that. He had been for 3 years at the monastery at Bec by Rouen, where Sir Richard chuckled. The abbot Hullion would not suffer me to remain." So they've had similar experiences by the sound of it. Why wouldn't he?" said Dan. "Because I rode my horse into the refectory when the scholars were at meat, to show the Saxon boys we Normans were not afraid of an abbot. It was that very Saxon Hugh tempted me to do it, and we had not met since that day." So Hugh got him into trouble, got him chucked out by challenging him to ride the horse in. Just trying to find the right place on the page. "And we had not met since that day. I thought I knew his voice even inside my helmet, and for all that our lords fought, we each rejoiced we had not slain the other. He walked by my side, and he told me how a heathen god, as he believed, had given him his sword, but he said he had never heard it sing before. I remember I warned him to beware of sorcery and quick enchantments." Sir Richard smiled to himself. "I was very young. When we came to his house here, we had almost forgotten that we had been at blows. It was near midnight, and the great hall was full of men and women waiting news. There I first saw his sister, the Lady Aloeva. I think that's how you say it. I'm trying to find it where it's written on one line, not 2 lines, so it's Aloeva. We'll try that. Of whom he had spoken to us in France. She cried out fiercely at me and would have had me hanged in that hour, but her brother said that I had spared his life. He said not how he saved mine from the Saxons, and that our Duke had won the day. And even while they wrangled over my poor body, of a sudden he fell down in a swoon from his wounds. "This is thy fault," said Lady Aloeva to me, and she kneeled above him and called for wine and cloths. "If I had known," I answered, "he should have ridden and I walked, but he set me on my horse. He made no complaint. He walked beside me and spoke merrily throughout. I pray I have done him no harm." "Thou hast need to pray," she said, catching up her underlip. "If he dies, thou shalt hang." They bore off Hugh to his chamber, but 3 tall men of the house bound me and set me under the beam of the great hall with a rope round my neck. The end of the rope they flung over the beam, and they sat them down by the fire to wait word whether Hugh lived or died. They cracked nuts with their knife hilts the while. "And how did you feel?" said Dan. "Very weary, but I did heartily pray for my schoolmate Hugh, his health. About noon I heard horses in the valley, and the 3 men loosed my ropes and fled out, and de Aquila's men rode up. Gilbert de Aquila came with them, for it was his boast that, like his father, he forgot no man that served him. He was little, like his father, but terrible, with a nose like an eagle's nose and yellow eyes like an eagle. He rode tall war horses, roans, which he bred himself, and he could never abide to be helped into the saddle. He saw the rope hanging from the beam and laughed, and his men laughed, for I was too stiff to rise." He'd been sitting there so long. This is poor entertainment for a Norman knight," he said, "but such as it is, let us be grateful. Show me, boy, to whom thou owest most, and we shall pay them out of hand." "What did he mean? To kill him?" said Dan. "Assuredly, but I looked at the lady Elueva, where she stood among her maids, and her brother beside her. De Aquila's men had driven them all into the great hall." "Was she pretty?" said Una. "In all my long life I have never seen woman fit to strew rushes before my lady Elueva," the knight replied, quite simply and quietly. "As I looked at her, I thought I might save her and her house by a jest." "Seeing that I come somewhat hastily and without warning," said I to de Aquila, "I have no fault to find with the courtesy that these Saxons have shown me." But my voice shook. It was not good to jest with that little man. All were silent a while, till de Aquila laughed. "Look, men, a miracle," said he. "The fight is scarce sped. My father is not yet buried, and here we find our youngest knight already set down in his manor, while his Saxons, ye can see it in their fat faces, have paid him homage and service. By the saints," he said, rubbing his nose, "I never thought England would be so easy won. Surely I can do no less than give the lad what he has taken. This manor shall be thine, boy," he said, "till I come again or till thou art slain. Now mount, men, and ride. We follow our Duke into Kent to make him King of England." He drew me with him to the door while they brought his horse, a lean roan, taller than my swallow here, but not so well girthed. "Hark to me," he said, fretting with his great war gloves. "I have given thee this manor, which is a Saxon hornet's nest, and I think thou wilt be slain in a month, as my father was slain. Yet if thou canst keep the roof on the hall, the thatch on the barn, and the plough in the furrow till I come back, thou shalt hold the manor from me. For the Duke has promised our Earl Mortain all the lands by Pevensey, and Mortain would give me of them what he would have given my father. God knows if thou or I shall live till England is won, but remember, boy, that here and now fighting is foolishness, and," he reached for the reins, "craft and cunning is all." So there's a time to fight and there's a time to be clever. There you go. "Alas, I have no cunning," said I. "Not yet," said he, hopping abroad, foot in stirrup and poking his horse in the belly with his toe. "Not yet, but I think thou hast a good teacher. Farewell, hold the manor and live, lose the manor and hang," he said, and spurred out, his shield straps squeaking behind him. So, children, here I was, little more than a boy, and Santlache fight, not 2 days old, left alone with my 30 men-at-arms, in a land I knew not, among people whose tongue I could not speak, to hold down the land which I had taken from them. "And that was here at home?" said Una. "Yes, here. See, from the upper ford, Welland's Ford, to the lower ford by the Belle Allee, west and east it ran half a league. From the beacon of Brunanburg behind us here, south and north it ran a full league, and all the woods were full of broken men, from Santlache, Saxon thieves, Norman plunderers, robbers and deer stealers. A hornet's nest indeed. So it's a piece of land that everyone has been able to escape from the battle towards those who had various reasons to get away at the time. Sorry, I'll just have a bit of my coffee before it's too late. When de Aquila had gone, Hugh would have thanked me for saving their lives. The Lady Elueva said that I had done it only for the sake of receiving the manor. How could I know that de Aquila would give it to me? I said. If I had told him I had spent my night in your halter, he would have burned the place twice over by now. If any man had put my neck in a rope, she said, I would have seen his house burned thrice over before I would have made terms. But it was a woman, I said, and I laughed, and she wept and said that I mocked her in her captivity. Lady, said I, there is no captive in this valley except one, and he is not a Saxon. Remember, she had held him captive. There, finished. At this she cried that I was a Norman thief who came with false sweet words, having intended from the first to turn her out in the fields to beg her bread. Into the fields? She had never seen the face of war. I was angry and answered, This much at least I can disprove, for I swear, and on my sword hilt I swore it in that place, I swear I will never set foot in the great hall till the Lady Elueva herself shall summon me there. She went away, saying nothing, and I walked out, and Hugh limped after me, whistling dolorously. That is a custom of the English. And we came upon the 3 Saxons that had bound me. They were now bound by my men-at-arms, and behind them stood some 50 stark and sullen churls of the house and the manor, waiting to see what should fall. We heard de Aquila's trumpets blow thin through the woods Kentward, in the direction of Kent. Shall we hang these? Said my men. Then my churls will fight, said Hugh, beneath his breath, but I bade him ask the 3 what mercy they hoped for. None, said they all. She bade us hang thee if our master died, and we would have hanged thee. There is no more to it. As I stood doubting, a woman ran down from the oak wood above the King's Hill yonder, and cried out that some Normans were driving off the swine there. Norman or Saxon, said I, we must beat them back, or they will rob us every day. Out at them with any arms ye have. So I loosed those 3 carles, and we ran together, my men-at-arms and the Saxons, with bills, that's bill hooks, and axes which they had hidden in the thatch of their huts, and Hugh led them. Halfway up the King's Hill we found a false fellow from Picardy, that's over on the French territories, a sutler that sold wine in the Duke's camp, with a dead knight's shield on his arm, a stolen horse under him, and some 10 or 12 wastrels at his tail, all cutting and slashing at the pigs. We beat them off and saved our pork. 170 pigs we saved in that great battle. Sir Richard laughed. That then was our first work together, and I bade Hugh tell his folk that so would I deal with any man, knight or churl, Norman or Saxon, who stole as much as 1 egg from our valley. Said he to me, riding home, Thou hast gone far to conquer England this evening. I answered, England must be thine and mine then. Help me, Hugh, to deal aright with these people. Make them to know that if they slay me, de Aquila will surely send to slay them, and he will put a worse man in my place. That's a good point. That may well be true, said he, and gave me his hand. Better the devil we know than the devil we do not, till we can pack you Normans home. And so, too, said his Saxons, and they laughed as we drove the pigs downhill. But I think some of them even then began not to hate me. I like brother Hugh, said Una softly. Beyond question, he was the most perfect, courteous, valiant, tender, and wise knight that ever drew breath, said Sir Richard, caressing the sword. He hung up his sword, this sword, on the wall of the great hall, because he said it was fairly mine, and he never took it down till de Aquila returned, as I shall presently show. For 3 months his men and mine guarded the valley, till all robbers and night walkers learned there was nothing to get from us save hard tack and a hanging. Side by side we fought against all who came. Thrice a week sometimes we fought against thieves and landless knights looking for good manners. Then we were in some peace, and I made shift by Hugh's help to govern the valley. For all this valley of yours was my manor, as a knight should. Govern as a knight should. I kept the roof on the hall and the thatch on the barn, but the English are a bold people. His Saxons would laugh and jest with Hugh, and Hugh with them, and this was marvellous to me. If even the meanest of them said that such and such a thing was the custom of the manor, then straightway would Hugh and such old men of the manor as might be near forsake everything else to debate the matter. I have seen them stop the mill with the corn half ground, and if the custom or usage were proven to be as it was said, why that was the end of it, even though it were flat against Hugh, his wish and command. Wonderful! Aye, said Puck, breaking in for the first time, the custom of old England was here before your Norman knights came, and it outlasted them, though they fought against it cruel. Not I, said Sir Richard. I let the Saxons go their stubborn way, but when my own men-at-arms, Normans not 6 months in England, stood up and told me what was the custom of the country, then I was angry. His own men actually were joining in. Ah, good days, ah, wonderful people, and I loved them all. The knight lifted his arms as though he would hug the whole dear valley, and Swallow, hearing the chink of his chainmail, looked up and whinnied softly. At last, he went on, after a year of striving and contriving and some little driving, d'Aquila came to the valley alone and without warning. I saw him first at the lower ford with a swineherd's brat on his saddle-bow. There is no need for thee to give any account of thy stewardship, said he. I have it all from the child here. And he told me how the young thing had stopped his tall horse at the ford by waving of a branch and crying that the way was barred, and if one bold bare babe be enough to guard the ford in these days, thou hast done well, said he, and puffed and wiped his head. He pinched the child's cheek and looked at our cattle in the flat by the river. Both fat, said he, rubbing his nose. This is craft and cunning, such as I love. What did I tell thee when I rode away, boy? Hold the manor or hang, said I. I had never forgotten it. Sorry, itchy nose. True, and thou hast held. He clambered from his saddle and with his sword's point cut out a turf from the bank and gave it to me where I kneeled. Dan looked at Una, and Una looked at Dan. That's season, said Puck in a whisper. Season. Seizing? Something like that. Seisin. Now thou art lawfully seized of the manor. Season. Sir Richard, said he, 'twas the first time he ever called me that. Sir Richard. Thou and thy heirs for ever. This must serve till the king's clerks write out thy title on a parchment. England is all ours, if we can hold it. What service shall I pay? I asked, and I remember I was proud beyond words. Knight's fee, boy, knight's fee, said he, hopping round his horse on one foot. How I said he was little, and could not endure to be helped to his saddle. 6 mounted men or 12 archers thou shalt send me whenever I call for them. And where got you that corn? Said he, for it was near harvest, and our corn stood well. I have never seen such bright straw. Send me 3 bags of the same seed yearly, and furthermore, in memory of our last meeting, with the rope round thy neck, entertain me and my men for 2 days of each year in the great hall of thy manor. Alas, said I, then my manor is already forfeit, for I am under vow not to enter the great hall. And I told him what I had sworn to the Lady Eloeva. And haven't you ever been into the house since? Said Una. Never, said Sir Richard, answered, smiling. I had made me a little hut of wood up the hill, and there I did justice and slept. D'Aquila wheeled aside, and his shield shook on his back. No matter, boy, said he, I will remit the homage for a year. He meant Sir Richard needn't give him dinner there the first year, Puck explained. D'Aquila stayed with me in the hut, and Hugh, who could read and write and cast accounts, showed him the roll of the manor, in which were written all the names of our fields and men, and he asked 1,000 questions touching the land, the timber, the grazing, the mill, and the fish ponds, and the worth of every man in the valley. But never he named the Lady Elueva's name, nor went he near the great hall. By night he drank with us in the hut. Yes, he sat on the straw like an eagle ruffled in her feathers, his yellow eyes rolling above the cup, and he pounced in his talk like an eagle, swooping from one thing to another, but always binding fast. Yes, he would lie still a while and then rustle in the straw, and speak sometimes as though he were King William himself, and anon he would speak in parables and tales, and if at once we saw not his meaning, he would yerk us in the ribs with his scabbarded sword. Yerk, that's a new word for you. Look you, boys, said he, I am born out of my time. 500 years ago I would have made all England such an England as neither Dane, Saxon, nor Norman should have conquered. 500 years hence I should have been a counsellor to kings, as the world hath never dreamed of. 'Tis all here, said he, tapping his big head, but it hath no play in this black age. Now Hugh here is a man. Now Hugh here is a better man than thou art, Richard. He had made his voice harsh and croaking like a raven's. Truth, said I, but for Hugh, his help and patience and long suffering, I could never have kept the manor. Nor thy life either, said D'Aquila. Hugh has saved thee not once but 100 times. Be still, Hugh, he said. Dost thou know, Richard, why Hugh slept and why he still sleeps among thy Norman men-at-arms? That's interesting. Good point. I wonder where this is going. Sorry, I'm just opening up another window. There's something I need here. Here we go. Oh, come on. Load. Thank you. That's what I wanted. To be near me, said I, for I thought this was truth. Fool, said D'Aquila, it is because his Saxons have begged him to rise against thee and to sweep every Norman out of the valley. No matter how I know, it is truth. Therefore Hugh hath made himself an hostage for thy life, well knowing that if any harm befell thee from his Saxons, thy Normans would slay him without remedy, and this his Saxons know. Is it true, Hugh? In some sort, said Hugh shamefacedly, at least. It was true half a year ago. My Saxons would not harm Richard now. I think they know him, but I judged it best to make sure. Look, children, what that man had done, and I had never guessed it. Night after night had he lain down among my men-at-arms, knowing that if one Saxon had lifted knife against me, his life would have answered for mine. Yes, said D'Aquila, and he is a swordless man. He pointed to Hugh's belt. For Hugh had put away his sword, did I tell you, the day after it flew from his hand at St. Lache. He carried only the short knife and the longbow. Swordless and landless art thou, Hugh, and they call thee kin to Earl Godwin. Hugh was indeed of Godwin's blood. The manor that was thine is given to this boy and to his children forever. Sit up and beg, for he can turn thee out like a dog, Hugh. Hugh said nothing, but I heard his teeth grind, and I bade D'Aquila, my own overlord, hold his peace, or I would stuff his words down his throat. Then D'Aquila laughed till tears ran down his face. I warned the king, said he, what would come of giving England to us Norman thieves. Here art thou, Richard, less than 2 days confirmed in thy manor, and already thou hast risen against thy overlord. What shall we do to him, Sir Hugh? I am a swordless man, said Hugh. Do not jest with me. And he laid his head on his knees and groaned. Greater fool thou, said D'Aquila, and all his voice changed, for I have given thee the manor of Dallington up the hill this half hour since. And he yerked at Hugh with his scabbard across the straw. To me, said Hugh, I am a Saxon, and except that I love Richard here, I have not sworn fealty to any Norman. In God's good time, which because of my sins I shall not live to see, there will be neither Saxon nor Norman in England, said d'Aquila. If I know men, thou art more faithful unsworn than, sorry, my page turned, a score of Normans. Thou art more faithful unsworn than a score of Normans I could name. Take Dallington and join Sir Richard to fight me tomorrow, if it please thee. Nay, said Hugh, I am no child. Where I take a gift, there I render service. And he put his hands between d'Aquila's and swore to be faithful, and as I remember, kissed him. And d'Aquila kissed us both. Putting her hands between the Lord's hands was a swearing of fealty, a swearing of association with them. We sat afterwards outside the hut while the sun rose, and d'Aquila marked our churls going to their work in the fields, and talked of holy things, and how we should govern our manors in time to come, and of hunting, and of horse breeding, and of the king's wisdom and unwisdom, for he spoke to us as though we were in all sorts now his brothers. I'm wondering if there's no one else that he particularly feels quite as safe with. Anon a churl stole up to me. He was one of the 3 I had not hanged a year ago, and he bellowed, which is the Saxon for whispering, obviously they're big-voiced people, that the lady Elueva would speak to me at the great house. She walked abroad daily in the manor, and it was her custom to send me word whither she went, that I might set an archer or 2 behind and in front to guard her. Very often I myself lay up in the woods and watched on her also. I went swiftly, and as I passed the great door it opened from within, and there stood my lady Elueva, and she said to me, Sir Richard, will it please you to enter your great hall? Then she wept, but we were alone. The knight was silent for a long time, his face turned across the valley, smiling. Oh, well done, said Una, and clapped her hands very softly. She was sorry, and she said so. Aye, she was sorry, and she said so, said Sir Richard, coming back with a little start. Very soon, but he said it was 2 full hours later, d'Aquila rode to the door, with his shield new scoured, Hugh had cleansed it, and demanded entertainment, and called me a false knight that would starve his overlord to death. Then Hugh cried out that no man should work in the valley that day, and our Saxons blew horns and set about feasting and drinking, and running of races and dancing and singing, and d'Aquila climbed upon a horse block and spoke to them in what he swore was good Saxon, but no man understood it. At night we feasted in the great hall, and when the harpers and the singers were gone, we 4 sat late at the high table. As I remember, it was a warm night with a full moon, and d'Aquila bade Hugh take down his sword from the wall again, for the honour of the manor of Dallington, and Hugh took it gladly enough. Dust lay on the hilt, for I saw him blow it off. She and I sat talking a little apart, and at first we thought the harpers had come back, for the great hall was filled with a rushing noise of music. D'Aquila leapt up, but there was only the moonlight fretty on the floor. Hearken, said Hugh, it is my sword. And as he belted it on, putting it on, the music ceased. O gods, forbid that I should ever belt blade like that, said d'Aquila. What does it foretell? The gods that made it may know. Last time it spoke was at Hastings, when I lost all my lands. Belike it sings now that I have new lands, and am a man again, said Hugh. He loosed the blade a little and drove it back happily into the sheath, and the sword answered him low and crooningly, as a woman would speak to a man, her head on his shoulder. Now that was the 2nd time in all my life I heard this sword sing. Look, said Una, there's mother coming down the long slip. What will she say to Sir Richard? She can't help seeing him. And Puck can't magic us this time, said Dan. Are you sure? Said Puck. And he leaned forward and whispered to Sir Richard, who, smiling, bowed his head. But what befell the sword and my brother Hugh I will tell on another time, said he, rising. Oh, hey, Swallow! The great horse cantered up from the far end of the meadow, close to Mother. They heard Mother say, Children, Gleeson's old horse has broken into the meadow again. Where did he get through? So she heard the horse, but didn't necessarily see it or recognise it. Just below Stone Bay, said Dan. He tore down simple flobs onto the bank. We noticed it just now, and we've caught no end of fish. We've been at it all afternoon. And they honestly believed that they had. They never noticed the oak, ash, and thorn leaves that Puck had slyly thrown into their laps. Sir Richard's Song. I followed my duke ere I was a lover, to take from England fief and fee. But now this game is the other way over, but now England hath taken me. I had my horse, my shield and banner, and a boy's heart so whole and free. But now I sing in another manner, but now England hath taken me. As for my father in his tower, asking news of my ship at sea, he will remember his own hour. Tell him England hath taken me. As for my mother in her bower, that rules my father so cunningly, she will remember a maiden's power. Tell her England hath taken me. As for my brother in Rouen city, a nimble and naughty page is he, but he will come to suffer and pity. Tell him England hath taken me. As for my little sister waiting in the pleasant orchards of Normandy, tell her youth is the time of mating. Tell her England hath taken me. As for my comrades in camp and highway that lift their eyebrows scornfully, tell them their way is not my way. Tell them England hath taken me. Kings and princes, barons famed, knights and captains in your degree, hear me a little before I am blamed, seeing England hath taken me. How so great man's strength be reckoned, there are two things he cannot flee. Love is the first, and death is the second, and love in England hath taken me. There you go. That's the end of that chapter. Wow. And hey, roosters, good to see you. So, as I described at the very beginning, it's a little bit of history, but told from a slightly different angle. It's actually told from the point of view of one of the Normans coming over, but then actually basically falling in love with the place and the people because of the way that they interacted together. I'm doing well, and I hope you are too. And if you're not, I hope that you can find something that's soothing for you. Just because we all need to, from time to time, find something that's calming and soothing. Sorry, I'm just putting down my coffee cup so the smell doesn't distract me, because I like coffee, but I've had enough for today. Did you see this? Look. Oh, you can't quite see it very well. There's a little bit there. You can kind of see it. It kind of goes with my overlay. It's purple. And it's a lot lighter in real life than what it looks in my camera. It's funny that. I was hoping it's meant to be up here. Oh yeah, there it is. I can kind of see it. And there's a little bit of the blonde because I didn't get the purple up far enough. It's a bit hard to I can't see over the top of my glasses. I'm that short-sighted. But it's really weird trying to do this in the mirror because you can't see it properly. It's the same problem as looking in the camera. I can't see over the top of my glasses well enough to see that I'm getting it in the right place. And next time I'm going to bleach my hair better and a bigger chunk so I can put more colour in. I've got some other colours I can use too. Anyway, it's been so long since I had any colour in my hair, and this is how I usually do it, is just a chunk of colour in amongst everything else, because I'm not trying to hide the grey. I don't have a problem with having grey hair. It's something that happens to people. And one day, other people will also have grey hair. Anyway, so it's a bit of fun. So we shall carry on reading the next chapter and songs and poems of Puck of Pook's Hill. Now, I'm just going to scroll down on Wikipedia and see if it tells me anything useful. Puck of Pook's Hill is a fantasy book by Rudyard Kipling, published in 1906, containing a series of short stories set in different periods of English history. It can count both as historical fantasy, since some of the stories told of the past have clear magical elements, fantasy, as contemporary fantasy, since it depicts a magical being active and practicing his magic in the England of the early 1900s when the book was written. So that's Puck talking to Dan and Una. The stories are all narrated to the two children living near Burwash in the High Weald of Sussex, in the area of Kipling's own house, Bateman's, by people magically plucked out of history by the elf Puck, or told by Puck himself, which is what we had with the very first one. Puck, who refers to himself as the oldest thing in England, is better known as a character in William Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream. The genres of particular stories ranging from authentic historic novella, A Centurion of the 30th, that's one of the stories we're going to get to one day, and On the Great Wall, to children's fantasy, such as Dymchurch Flit. Each story is bracketed by a poem which relates in some manner to the theme or subject of the story, and I'm going to stop reading about it there. But I am just going to scroll down to see where I'm up to. Young Men of the Manor, Sir Richard's song, Harp Song of the Dane Woman. Oh yeah, okay. I'm just trying to get the hang of the way this ebook is laid out. It's a little bit different. So it's got the chapter name, which is Knights of the Joyous Venture, and then it's actually got the title of the next poem or song before you get to the story part of it. And I've swapped which ebook I'm reading because the other one didn't really define in any way between the different bits. It was very confusing, which is why I missed the poem or song at the end of the other day's reading. Knights of the Joyous Venture, which starts off with Harp Song, a lament by the Danish women for their menfolk who leave to go on a viking on the grey sea. Go on a Viking raid, I suppose. Anyway, yeah, whatever. So I'm going to start with the next section. And for those who are new here, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories, and I am reading Puck of Pook's Hill, and we are up to the chapter called The Knights of the Joyous Venture, which is actually chapter 3. And it starts with Harp Song of the Dane Women. What is a woman that you forsake her, and the hearth fire and the home acre, to go with the old grey widow maker? She has no house to lay a guest in, but one chill bed for all to rest in, that the pale suns and the stray birds nest in. She has no strong white arms to fold you, but the 10 times fingering weed to hold you, bound on the rocks where the tide has rolled you. The weed's probably seaweed. Yet when the signs of summer thicken, and the ice breaks and the birch buds quicken, yearly you turn from our side and sicken again for the shouts and the slaughters, and steal away to the lapping waters, and look at your ship in her winter quarters. You forget our mirth, and talk at the tables, the kine in the shed, and the horse in the stables, to pitch her sides and go over her cables. Then you drive out where the storm clouds swallow, and the sound of your oar blades falling hollow is all we have left through the months to follow. Ah, what is a woman that you forsake her, and the hearth fire and the home acre, to go with the old grey widow maker? The grey of the sea, I think, and the weather. There you go. Yes, I've never actually thought of it from the point of view of the women who were left behind when the men went Viking raiding. We'll carry on. Remember, this chapter is called The Knights of the Joyous Venture. Let's see what this goes like. I don't think it's continuous with the previous story, because not all of these stories are. It was too hot to run about in the open, so Dan asked their friend, old Hobden, to take their own dinghy from the pond and put her on the brook at the bottom of the garden. Her painted name was the Daisy, but for exploring expeditions she was the Golden Hind, or the Long Serpent, or some such suitable name. So they gave her an imaginary name for when they were actually playing a game, obviously. Dan hiked and howked with a boat hook. The brook was too narrow for sculls, that's oars. And Una punted with a piece of hop pole. When they came to a very shallow place, the Golden Hind drew quite 3 inches of water. They disembarked and scuffled her over the gravel by her tow rope, and when they reached the overgrown banks beyond the garden, they pulled themselves upstream by the low branches. So the branches of the willows and things like that. Yeah. That day, it reminds me a little bit of the wind in the willows. That day they intended to discover the North Cape, like Othere, the old sea captain, in the book of verses which Una had brought with her. But on account of the heat, they changed it to a voyage up the Amazon and the sources of the Nile. That sounds a little bit like the Would-be-Goods, doesn't it? They went exploring, and are we going to Africa or are we going to the Arctic? That was one of their discussions, and they ended up in a bog at the top of the river and getting leeches on their legs. I remember that one, do you? Go and listen to that story, the Would-be-Goods. It's another book. But on account of the heat, they changed it to a voyage up the Amazon and the sources of the Nile. Even on the shaded water, the air was hot and heavy with drowsing scents, while outside, through the breaks in the trees, the sunshine burned the pasture like fire. The kingfisher was asleep on his watching branch, and the blackbirds scarcely took the trouble to dive into the next bush. Dragonflies wheeling and clashing were the only things at work except the moorhens and a big red admiral, which is a butterfly, who flapped down out of the sunshine for a drink. When they reached Otter Pool, the golden hind grounded comfortably on a shallow, and they lay beneath a roof of close green, watching the water trickle over the floodgates down the mossy brick chute from the mill stream to the brook. A big trout, the children knew him well, rolled head and shoulders at some fly that sailed round the bend, while once, and just so often, the brook rose a fraction of an inch against all the wet pebbles, and they watched the slow draw and shiver of a breath of air through the tree-tops. Then the little voices of the slipping water began again. "It's like the shadows talking, isn't it?" said Una. She had given up trying to read. Dan lay over the bows, trailing his hand in the current. They heard feet on the gravel bar that runs half across the pool, and saw Sir Richard Dalrymple standing over them. Sir Richard Dalrymple. "Was yours a dangerous voyage?" he asked, smiling. "She bumped a lot, sir," said Dan. "There's hardly any water this summer." "Ah, the brook was deeper and wider when my children played at Danish pirates. Are you pirate folk?" "Oh no, we gave up being pirates years ago," explained Una. "We're nearly always explorers now, sailing round the world, you know." "Round?" said Sir Richard. Remember, he's from quite a long time ago, probably back when they thought the earth was flat. He sat in the comfortable crotch of an old ash root on the bank. "How can it be round?" "Wasn't it in your books?" Dan suggested. He had been doing geography at his last lesson. "I can neither write nor read," he replied. "Canst thou read, child?" "Yes, because back in those days you had someone who did it for you." "Yes," said Dan, barring the very long words. "Wonderful. Read to me that I may hear for myself." Dan flushed, but opened the book and began, gabbling a little, at "The Discoverer of the North Cape." "Othere, the old sea captain who dwelt in Helgoland, to King Alfred, the lover of truth, brought a snow-white walrus tooth, which he held in his brown right hand. But, this I know, this is an old song, this I have heard sung, this is a miracle." Sir Richard interrupted. "Nay, do not stop." He leaned forward, and the shadows of the leaves slipped and slid on his chainmail. "I ploughed the land with horses, but my heart was ill at ease, for the old seafaring men came to me now and then with their sagas of the seas." His hand fell on the hilt of the great sword. "This is truth," he cried, "for so it did happen to me," and he beat time delightedly on the tramp of verse after verse. "And now the land," said Othere, "bent southward suddenly, and I followed the curving shore, and ever southward bore into a nameless sea." "A nameless sea," he repeated. "So did I, so did Hugh and I." "Where did you go? Tell us," said Una. "Wait, let me hear all first." So Dan read to the poem's very end. "Good," said the knight. "That is Othere's tale. Even so I have heard the men in the Dane ships sing it. Not those same valiant words, but something like them. Have you ever explored north? Dan shut the book. Nay, my venture was south, further south than any man has fared. Hugh and I went down with Witter and his heathen. He jerked the tall sword forward and leaned on it with both hands, but his eyes looked long past them. I thought you always lived here, said Una timidly. Yes, while my lady Elueva lived, but she died. She died. Then my eldest son, being a man, I asked Aquila's leave that he should hold the manor while I went on some journey or pilgrimage to forget. D'Aquila, whom the second William had made warden of Pevensey in Earl Mortaine's place, was very old then, but still he rode his tall roan horses, and in the saddle he looked a little like a little white falcon. When Hugh at Dallington over yonder heard what I did, he sent for my second son, whom, being unmarried, he had ever looked upon as his own child, and by D'Aquila's leave gave him the manor of Dallington to hold till he should return. Then Hugh came with me. When did this happen? Said Dan. That I can answer to the very day, for as we rode with D'Aquila by Pevensey, have I said that he was lord of Pevensey, and of the honour of the Eagle, to the Bordeaux ship that fetched him his wines yearly out of France, a marshman ran to us crying that he had seen a great black goat, which bore on his back the body of the king, and that the goat had spoken to him. On that same day, Red William, our king, the conqueror's son, died of a secret arrow while he hunted in a forest. This is a cross matter, said D'Aquila, to meet on the threshold of a journey. If Red William be dead, I may have to fight for my lands. Wait a little. My lady being dead, I cared nothing for signs and omens, nor Hugh either. We took that wine ship to go to Bordeaux, but the wind failed while we were yet in sight of Pevensey. A thick mist hid us, and we drifted with the tide along the cliffs to the west. Our company was, for the most part, merchants returning to France, and we were laden with wool, and there were 3 couple of tall hunting dogs chained to the rail. Their master was a knight of Artois. His name I never learned, but his shield bore gold pieces on a red ground, and he limped, much as I do, from a wound which he had got in his youth at Mantes siege. He served the Duke of Burgundy against the Moors in Spain, and was returning to that war with his dogs. He sang us strange Moorish songs that first night, and half persuaded us to go with him. I was on pilgrimage to forget, which is what no pilgrimage brings. I think I would have gone, but look you how the life and fortune of man changes. Towards morning, a Dane ship, rowing silently, struck against us in the mist, and while we rolled hither and yon, Hugh, leaning over the rail, fell outboard. I leapt after him, and we two tumbled aboard the Dane, and were caught and bound ere we could rise. Our own ship was swallowed up in the mist. I judged the knight of the gold pieces muzzled his dogs with his cloak, lest they should give tongue and betray the merchants, for I heard their baying suddenly stop. We lay bound among the benches till morning, because they don't want to be captured, the men on the ship, the other ship, don't want to be captured by the Danes. We lay bound among the benches till morning, when the Danes dragged us to the high deck by the steering place, and their captain, Witter he was called, turned us over with his foot. Bracelets of gold from elbow to armpit he wore, and his red hair was long as a woman's, and came down in plaited locks on his shoulder. He was stout, with bowed legs and long arms. He spoiled us of all we had. That means he checked through our pockets and everything and took what he wanted. But when he had laid hand on Hugh's sword and saw the runes on the blade, hastily he thrust it back. Yet his covetousness overcame him, and he tried again, and the third time the sword sang loudly and angrily, so that the rowers leaned on their oars to listen. Here they all spoke together, screaming like gulls, and a yellow man, such as I have never seen, came on the high deck and cut our bonds. He was yellow, not from sickness, but by nature, yellow as honey, and his eyes stood endwise in his head. I think he's probably the first Asian that they've ever seen. Hence the description. Sorry if you find it racist, but that's the way it was described at the time in this book. How do you mean? Said Una, her chin on her hand. Thus, said Sir Richard. He put a finger to the corner of each eye and pushed it up till his eyes narrowed. So he's just making his eyes seem longer, which looks more Chinese, Japanese, and other Asian style. Why, you look just like a Chinaman, cried Dan. Was the man a Chinaman? I know not what that may be, said Sir Richard, because he's never been to China. How would he know? And they weren't common in England at the time that Sir Richard was around, were they? Anyway, I know not what that may be. Witter had found him half dead among ice on the shores of Muscovy. That's Moscow. We thought he was a devil. He crawled before us and brought food in a silver dish, which these sea-wolves had robbed from some rich abbey, and Witter, with his own hands, gave us wine. He spoke a little in French and a little in South Saxon, and much in the Northman's tongue. We asked him to set us ashore, promising to pay him better ransom than he would get price if he sold us to the Moors, as once befell a knight of my acquaintance, sailing from Flushing. Not by my father Guthrum's head, said he, the gods sent ye into my ship for a luck offering. At this I quaked, for I knew it was still the Danes' custom to sacrifice captives to their gods for fair weather. A plague on thy 4 long bones, said Hugh. What profit canst thou make of poor old pilgrims that can neither work nor fight? So obviously the men think themselves old now. Gods forbid I should fight against thee, poor pilgrim with the singing sword, said he. Come with us and be poor no more. Thy teeth are far apart, which is a sure sign thou wilt travel and grow rich. What if we will not come, said Hugh. Swim to England or France, said Witter. We are midway between the two. Unless ye choose to drown yourselves, no hair of your head will be harmed here aboard. We think ye bring us luck, and I myself know the runes on that sword are good. He turned and bade them hoist sail. Hereafter all made way for us as we walked about the ship, and the ship was full of wonders. What was she like? Said Dan. Long, low, and narrow, bearing one mast with a red sail, and rowed by 15 oars a side. The knight answered, At her bows was a deck under which men might lie, and at her stern another, shut off by a painted door from the rowers' benches. Here Hugh and I slept with Witter and the yellow man, upon tapestries as soft as wool. I remember, he laughed to himself, when first we entered there, a loud voice cried, Out swords, kill, kill. Seeing us start, Witter laughed, and showed us it was but a great beaked grey bird with a red tail. He sat her on his shoulder, and she called for bread and wine hoarsely, and prayed him to kiss her. Yet she was no more than a silly bird. But ye knew this? He looked at their smiling faces. We weren't laughing at you, said Una. That must have been a parrot. It's just what pollies do. Parrots mimic, if you train them to. So we learn later. But here is another marvel. The yellow man, whose name was Kitai, had with him a brown box. In the box was a blue bowl with red marks upon the rim, and within the bowl, hanging from a fine thread, was a piece of iron, no thicker than a grass stem, as long as maybe as my spur, but straight. In this iron, said Witter, abode an evil spirit, which Kitai the yellow man had brought by art magic out of his own country that lay 3 years' journey southward. The evil spirit strove day and night to return to his country, and therefore, look you, the iron needle pointed continually to the south. South, said Dan suddenly, and put his hand into his pocket. With my own eyes I saw it. Every day and all day long, though the ship rolled, though the sun and the moon and the stars were hid, this blind spirit in the iron knew whither it would go, and strained to the south. Witter called it the wise iron, because it showed him his way across the unknowable seas. Again Sir Richard looked keenly at the children. How think ye? Was it sorcery? Was it anything like this? Dan fished out his old brass pocket compass. that generally lived with his knife and key ring. The glasses got cracked, but the needle waggles all right, sir. The knight drew a long breath of wonder. Yes, yes! The wise iron shook and swung in just this fashion. Now it is still. Now it points to the south. North, said Dan. Nay, south. There is the south, said Sir Richard, and then they both laughed, for naturally when one end of a straight compass needle points to the north, the other must point to the south. Tay, said Richard, clicking his tongue, there can be no sorcery if a child carries it. Wherefore does it point south or north? Father says that nobody knows, said Una. Sir Richard looked relieved. Then it may still be magic. It was magic to us. And so we voyaged. When the wind served, we hoisted sail and lay all up along the windward rail, our shields on our backs to break the spray. When it failed, they rowed with long oars. The yellow man sat by the wise iron, and Witter steered. At first I feared the great white flowering waves, but as I saw how wisely Witter led his ship among them, I grew bolder. In other words, they hadn't done a lot of sailing. Sir Richard had come across from Normandy on a ship to England, but he probably hadn't done a lot of other boating, maybe in a dinghy rowboat, but other than that, he wasn't used to being on a big sea, unlike the Viking. Hugh liked it well from the first. My skill is not upon the water, and rocks and whirlpools, such as we saw by the West Isles of France, where an oar caught on a rock and broke, are much against my stomach. Off the end of France, there are currents that whip around the different rocks there, and it's quite dangerous, and they probably passed fairly close to them, and that's what that's about. We sailed south across a stormy sea where by moonlight between clouds we saw a Flanders ship roll clean over and sink. Again, this is probably why they're up on the top rail, to keep the boat balanced so it doesn't get pushed too hard sideways by the wind and roll over, because I don't think that they used a keel like we do now, which is an extra heavy weight fastened to the bottom. I'll carry on, sorry. It's the sailing background. Again, though Hugh laboured with Witter all night, I lay under the deck with the talking bird and cared not whether I lived or died. There is a sickness of the sea which lasted for 3 for 3 days is pure death. Yes, one wishes to die. Initially, one is worried that one will die. And then after a while, it's just been going on so long, feeling so sick, that one wishes one could die. It's not fun, seasickness. And then if it carries on even longer, one is worried that one won't die to get out of it. That's one of the sailors' jokes. I don't know if it comes in here, so we'll carry on. There is a sickness of the sea which for 3 days is pure death. When we next saw land, Witter said it was Spain, and we stood out to sea. That coast was full of ships busy in the Duke's war against the Moors, and we feared to be hanged by the Duke's men or sold into slavery by the Moors. So we put into a small harbour, which Witter knew. At night, men came down with loaded mules, and Witter exchanged amber out of the north against little wedges of iron and packets of beads in earthen pots. The pots he put under the decks, and the wedges of iron he laid on the bottom of the ship, after he had cast out the stones and shingle, which till then had been our ballast. So they have weight across the bottom of the ship to help with keeping it balanced, but they didn't have a keel, which is a bit that pokes down into the water even further, which is very heavy, because that design hadn't yet come up. But the ballast helps to keep the boat upright. Wine, too, he bought for lumps of sweet-smelling grey amber. That's ambergris, which is used to hold fragrances, and it comes from Wales, just in case you were wondering. Lumps of sweet-smelling grey amber. A little morsel no bigger than a thumbnail purchased a cask of wine, but I speak like a merchant. No, do tell us what you had to eat, cried Dan. Meat dried in the sun, and dried fish and ground beans. Witter took in and corded frails of a certain sweet soft fruit which the Moors use, which is like paste of figs but with thin long stones. Aha! Dates is the name. Now, said Witter, when the ship was loaded, I counsel you strangers to pray to your gods, for from here on our road is no man's road. He and his men killed a black goat for sacrifice on the bows, and the yellow man brought out a small smiling image of dull green stone, that's jade, and burned incense before it. Hugh and I commended ourselves to God and St. Barnabas and Our Lady of the Assumption, who was specially dear to my lady. We were not young, but I think no shame to say, when as we drove out of that secret harbour at sunrise over a still sea, we too rejoiced and sang, as did the knights of old when they followed our great Duke to England. Yet was our leader an heathen pirate, all our proud fleet, but one galley perilously overloaded. For guidance we leaned on a pagan sorcerer, and our port was beyond the world's end. Witter told us that his father, Guthrum, had once in his life rowed along the shores of Africa to a land where naked men sold gold for iron and beads. There he had bought much gold and no few elephants' teeth, and thither, by help of the wise iron, would Witter go. Witter feared nothing except to be poor. My father told me, said Witter, that a great shoal runs 3 days' sail out from that land, and south of the shoal lies a forest which grows in the sea. South and east of the forest, my father came to a place where the men hid gold in their hair, but all that country, he said, was full of devils who lived in trees and tore folk limb from limb. How think ye? Gold or no gold, said Hugh, fingering his sword, it is a joyous venture. Have at these devils of thine, Witter. Venture, said Witter sourly. I am only a poor sea thief. I do not set my life adrift on a plank for joy, or the venture. Once I beach the ship again at Stavanger, and feel my wife's arms round my neck, I'll seek no more ventures. So he's been listening to that. A ship is heavier care than a wife or cattle. He leapt down among the rowers, chiding them for their little strength and their great stomachs. Yet Witter was a wolf in fight, and a very fox in cunning. We were driven south by a storm, and for 3 days and 3 nights he took the stern oar, that's the tiller, with the rudder on it for steering the boat, and threadled the long ship through the sea. When it rose beyond measure, he brake a pot of whale's oil upon the water, which wonderfully smoothed it, and in that anointed patch he turned her head to the wind, and threw out oars at the end of a rope, to make, he said, an anchor, at which we lay rolling sorely, but dry. This craft his father Guthrum had shown him. He knew, too, all the leech book of Bold, who was a wise doctor, and he knew the ship book of Hlaf, the woman who robbed Egypt. He knew all the care of a ship. After the storm we saw a mountain whose top was covered with snow and pierced the clouds. The grasses under this mountain, boiled and eaten, are a good cure for soreness of the gums and swelled ankles. That sounds like scurvy. We lay there 8 days till men in skins threw stones at us. When the heat increased, Witter spread a cloth on bent sticks above the rowers, for the wind failed between the island of the mountain and the shore of Africa, which is east of it. That shore is sandy, and we rowed along it within 3 bow-shots. Here we saw whales and fish in the shape of shields, but longer than our ship. That sounds like a sunfish. Have a look. They're really strange-looking fish. They don't look very big that way, but if you look at them this way, it's like a big round thing with fins. Strange-looking fish. Sunfish. Fish in the shape of shields, but longer than our ship. Some slept, some opened their mouths at us, and some danced on the hot waters. The water was hot to the hand, and the sky was hidden by hot grey mists, out of which blew a fine dust that whitened our hair and beards of a morning. Here, too, were fish that flew in the air like birds. They would fall on the laps of the rowers, and when we went ashore, we would roast and eat them. We call them flying fish. You can still see them, although the ones that you see in the Pacific are usually quite small. Tiny, some of them are tiny, tiny little fish, right up to about this sort of big. But sometimes you can get much bigger ones, flying fish. They've got fins, and so they come, launch themselves out of the water and then open their fins. Their fins open out like a fan along the side of them instead of being all packed in like a fan. And as they go through the air, it stops them dropping down quite so quickly into the water again. And they can go quite a long distance. The knight paused to see if the children doubted him, but they only nodded and said, "Go on." The yellow land lay on our left, the grey sea on our right. Knight though I was, I pulled my oar among the rowers. I caught seaweed and dried it and stuffed it between the pots of beads, lest they should break. Knighthood is for the land. At sea, look you, a man is but a spurless rider on a bridleless horse. I learned to make strong knots and ropes, yes, and to join 2 ropes end to end, so that even Witter could scarcely see where they had been married. So that's splicing. But Hugh had 10-fold more sea cunning than I. Witter gave him charge of the rowers on the left side. Thorkild of Borkum, a man with a broken nose, that wore a Norman steel cap, had the rowers on the right, and each side rowed and sang against the other. They saw that no man was idle. Truly, as Hugh said, and Witter would laugh at him, a ship is all more care than a manor. How thus? There was water to fetch from the shore when we could find it, as well as wild fruit and grasses and sand for scrubbing of the decks, and benches to keep them sweet. Also we hauled the ship out on low islands and emptied all her gear, even to the iron wedges, and burned off the weed that had grown on her, with torches of rush, and smoked below the decks with rushes dampened in salt water, as Hlaf the woman orders in her ship book. Once when we were thus stripped and the ship lay propped on her keel, the bird cried, "Out swords!" as though she saw an enemy. Witter vowed he would wring her neck. Poor Polly. Did he? Said Una. Nay, she was the ship's bird. She would call all the rowers by name. Those were good days for a wifeless man, with Witter and his heathen. Beyond the world's end, after many weeks, we came to the great shoal, which stretched, as Witter's father had said, far out to sea. So what he's been talking about before now was very old ways of looking after a ship. When a ship is in the water for a long time, in the days before modern ships made out of steel and anti-fouling paint, you get what they call fouling, which is growing of different sea plants on the underside of the boat. And the more stuff grows there, the harder work it is to move the boat along. It's like having a garden or a weed patch that you're dragging along through the water, not just a nice smooth boat. And so they were doing that. Smoking the inside is probably killing any of the bugs and insects and stuff that are there. Fee-free passengers that might cause problems, like things that might eat into their food supplies and things like that. So what they're doing is practicing good boat hygiene to keep them going, to keep them safe, keep them healthy for longer. I'll carry on. After many weeks we came to the great shoal which stretched, as Witter's father had said, far out to sea. We skirted it till we were giddy with the sight and dizzy with the sound of bars and breakers, and when we reached land again we found a naked black people dwelling among the woods, who for 1 wedge of iron loaded us with fruits and grasses and eggs. Witter scratched his head at them in sign he would buy gold. They had no gold, but they understood the sign. All the gold traders hide their gold in their thick hair. For they pointed along the coast. They beat too on their chests with their clenched hands, and that, if we had known it, was an evil sign. What did it mean? Said Dan. Patience, ye shall hear. We followed the coast eastward 16 days, counting time by sword cuts on the hilm rail, till we came to the forest in the sea. Trees grew there out of mud, arched upon lean and high roots, and many muddy waterways ran awhither into darkness under the trees. Here we lost the sun. We followed the winding channels between the trees, and where we could not row, we laid hold of the crusted roots and hauled ourselves along. They sound like mangroves, but really big ones. The water was foul, and great glittering flies tormented us. Morning and evening a blue mist covered the mud, which bred fevers. 4 of our rowers sickened, and were bound to their benches lest they should leap overboard and be eaten by the monsters of the mud. The yellow man lay sick beside the wise iron, rolling his head and talking in his own tongue. Only the bird throve. She sat on Witter's shoulder and screamed in that noisome, silent darkness. Yes, I think it was the silence we most feared. He paused to listen to the comfortable home noises of the brook. When we had lost count of time among those black gullies and swashes, we heard, as it were, a drumbeat far off, and following it we broke into a broad brown river by a hut in a clearing among fields of pumpkins. We thanked God to see the sun again. The people of the village gave the good welcome, for Witter scratched his head at them for gold, and showed them our iron and beads. They ran to the bank, we were still in the ship, and pointed to our swords and bows, for always when near shore we lay armed. Soon they fetched store of golden bars, and in dust from their huts, and some great blackened elephant's teeth. Those are tusks, ivory. These they piled on the bank as though to tempt us, and made signs of dealing blows in battle, and pointed up to the tree-tops and to the forest behind. Their captain, or chief sorcerer, then beat on his chest with his fists and gnashed his teeth. Said Thorkild of Borkum, do they mean we must fight for all this gear? And he half drew sword. Nay, said Hugh, I think they ask us to league against some enemy. I like this not, said Witter of a sudden, back into midstream. So we did, and sat still all, watching the black folk and the gold they piled on the bank. Again we heard drums beat in the forest, and the people fled to their huts, leaving the gold unguarded. Then Hugh, at the bows, pointed without speech, and we saw a great devil come out of the forest. He shaded his brows with his hand and moistened his pink tongue between his lips, thus. A devil, said Dan, delightfully horrified. Yea, taller than a man, covered with reddish hair. When he had well regarded our ship, he beat on his chest with his fists till it sounded like rolling drums, and came to the bank, swinging all his body between his long arms, and gnashed his teeth at us. Hugh loosed an arrow and pierced him through the throat. He fell roaring, and 3 other devils ran out of the forest and hauled him into a tall tree out of sight. Anon they cast down the blood-stained arrow and lamented together among the leaves. Witter saw the gold on the bank. He was loath to leave it. Sirs, said he, no man had spoken till then, yonder is what we have come so far and so painfully to find, laid out to our very hand. Let us row in while these devils bewail themselves, and at least bear off what we may. Bold as a wolf, cunning as a fox, was Witter. He set 4 archers on the foredeck to shoot the devils if they should leap from the tree, which was close to the bank. He manned 10 oars on a side, and bade them watch his hand to row in or back out, and so coaxed he them toward the bank. But none would set foot ashore, though the gold was within 10 paces. No man is hasty to his hanging. They whimpered at their oars like beaten hounds, and Witter bit his fingers for rage. Said Hugh of a sudden, Hark! At first we thought it was the buzzing of the glittering flies on the water, but it grew loud and fierce, so that all men heard. What? Said Dan and Una. It was the sword. Sir Richard patted the smooth hilt. It sang as a Dane sings before battle. I go, said Hugh, and he leapt from the bows and fell among the gold. I was afraid to my 4 bones' marrow. I'm thinking that's all the leg bones, but I'm not sure. But for shame's sake I followed, and Thorkild of Borkum leapt after me. None other came after. Blame me not, cried Witter behind us. I must abide by my ship. We 3 had no time to blame or praise. We stooped to the gold and threw it back over our shoulders, one hand on our swords and one eye on the tree which nigh overhung us. I know not how the devils leapt down, or how the fight began. I heard Hugh cry, Out! Out! as though he were at Santlash again. I saw Thorkild's steel cap smitten off his head by a great hairy hand, and I felt an arrow from the ship whistle past my ear. They say that Witter took his sword to the rowers. He could not bring his ship inshore. And each one of the 4 archers said afterwards that he alone had pierced the devil that fought me. I do not know. I went to it in my mail shirt, which saved my skin. With long sword and belt dagger, I fought for life against a devil whose very feet were hands, and who whirled me back and forth like a dead branch. He had me by the waist, my arms to my side, when an arrow from the ship pierced him between the shoulders, and he loosened grip. I passed my sword twice through him, and he crutched himself away between his long arms, coughing and moaning. Next, as I remember, I saw Thorkild of Borkum, bareheaded and smiling, leaping up and down before a devil that leapt and gnashed his teeth. Then Hugh passed. His sword shifted to his left hand, and I wondered why I had not known that Hugh was a left-handed man, and thereafter I remembered nothing till I felt spray on my face, and we were in sunshine on the open sea. That was 20 days after. What had happened? Did Hugh die? The children asked. Never was such a fight fought by christened man, said Sir Richard. An arrow from the ship had saved me from my devil, and Thorkild of Borkum had given back before his devil till the bowman on the ship could shoot it full of arrows from nearby. But Hugh's devil was cunning, and had kept behind the trees where no arrow could reach. Body to body there, by stark strength of sword and hand, had Hugh slain him, and dying, the thing had clenched his teeth on the sword. Judge what teeth they were. Sir Richard turned the sword again, that the children might see the 2 great chiselled gouges on either side of the blade. Those same teeth met in Hugh's right arm and side, Sir Richard went on. I had no more than a broken foot and a fever. Thorkild's ear was bitten, but Hugh's arm and side clean withered away. I saw him where he lay along, sucking a fruit in his left hand. His flesh was wasted off his bones, his hair was patched with white, and his hand was blue-veined, like a woman's. Saying like a woman's because a hybrid woman didn't spend a lot of time out in the sun, and so therefore you could see the veins through the skin because her skin was pale. He put his left arm round my neck and whispered, "Take my sword. It has been thine since Hastings, O my brother, but I can never hold hilt again." We lay there on the high deck talking of St. Lash, and I think of every day since St. Lash. And it came so that we both wept. I was weak, and he little more than a shadow. "Nay, nay," said Witter at the helm rail. "Gold is a good right arm to any man. Look at the gold." He bade Thorkild show us the gold and the elephant's teeth as though we had been children. He had brought away all the gold on the bank, and twice as much more that the people of the village gave him for slaying the devils. They worshipped us as gods. Thorkild told me it was one of their old women healed up Hugh's poor arm. "How much gold did you get?" asked Dan. "How can I say? Where we came out with wedges of iron under the rowers' feet, we returned with wedges of gold hidden beneath the planks. There was dust of gold in packages where we slept, and along the side and crosswise under the benches we lashed the blackened elephant's teeth." "I had sooner have my right arm," said Hugh, when he had seen all. "Aye, that was my fault," said Witter. "I should have taken ransom and landed you in France when first you came aboard, 10 months ago." "It is over late now," said Hugh, laughing. Witter plucked at his long shoulder lock. "But think," said he, "if I had let ye go, which I swear I would never have done, for I love ye more than brothers, if I had let ye go, by now ye might have been horribly slain by some mere Moor in the Duke of Burgundy's war, or you might have been murdered by land thieves, or ye might have died of the plague at an inn. Think of this, and do not blame me overmuch, Hugh. See, I will only take a half of the gold." "I blame thee not at all, Witter," said Hugh. "It was a joyous venture, and we 35 here have done what never men have done. If I live till England, I will build me a stout keep over Dallington out of my share." I will buy a castle and amber and warm red cloth for the wife, said Witter, and I will hold all the land at the head of Stavanger fjord. Many will fight for me now, but first we must turn north, and with this honest treasure aboard, I pray we meet no pirate ships. We did not laugh. We were careful. We were afraid lest we should lose 1 grain of our gold, for which we had fought devils. Where is the sorcerer? Said I, for Witter was looking at the wise iron in the box, and I could not see the yellow man. He has gone to his own country, said he. He rose up in the night while we were beating out of that forest in the mud, and said that he could see it, behind the trees. He leapt out on the mud, and did not answer when we called, so we called no more. He left the wise iron, which is all that I care for, and see, the spirit still points to the south. We were troubled for fear that the wise iron should fail us now that its yellow man had gone, and when we saw the spirit still served us, we grew afraid of 2 strong winds, and of shoals, and of careless leaping fish, and of all the people on the shores where we landed. Why? Said Dan. Because of the gold, because of our gold. Gold changes men altogether. Thorkild of Borkum did not change. He laughed at Witter for his fears, and at us for our counselling Witter to furl sail when the ship pitched at all. Better be drowned out of hand, said Thorkild of Borkum, than go tied to a deckload of yellow dust. He was a landless man, and had been slave to some king in the east. He would have beaten out the gold into deep bands to put round the oars and round the prow. Yet, though he vexed himself for the gold, Witter waited upon Hugh like a woman, lending him his shoulder when the ship rolled, and tying of ropes from side to side that Hugh might hold by them. But for Hugh, he said, and so did all his men, they would never have won the gold. I remember Witter made a little thin gold ring for our bird to swing in. So it sounds like the Chinese guy had a fever or something like that and had been hallucinating, and so he'd run off through the mangroves and disappeared. Remember, he'd been lying there and tossing and turning and speaking in ways that they couldn't understand. 3 months we rowed and sailed and went ashore for fruits or to clean the ship. When we saw wild horsemen riding among sand dunes, flourishing spears, we knew we were on the Moors coast, and stood over north to Spain, so that would be Morocco, and stood over north to Spain, and a strong southwest wind, I have an itchy leg, and a strong southwest wind bore us in 10 days to a coast of high red rocks, where we heard a hunting horn blow among the yellow gorse, and knew it was England. Now find ye Pevensey yourselves, said Witter. I love not these narrow ship-filled seas. He set the dried salted head of the devil, which Hugh had killed, high on our prow, and all boats fled from us. Yet for our gold's sake we were more afraid than they. We crept along the coast by night till we came to the chalk cliffs, and so east to Pevensey. Witter would not come ashore with us, though Hugh promised him wine at Dallington, enough to swim in. He was on fire to see his wife, and ran into the marsh after the sunset, and there sailed inwards, ran into the marsh after sunset. And there he left us and our share of gold, and backed out on the same tide. He made no promise, he swore no oath, he looked for no thanks, but to Hugh, an armless man, and to me, an old cripple, whom he could have flung into the sea, he passed over wedge upon wedge, packet upon packet of gold and dust of gold, and only ceased when we would take no more. As he stooped from the rail to bid us farewell, he stripped off his right arm bracelets and put them all on Hugh's left, and kissed Hugh on the cheek. I think when Thorkild of Borkum bade the rowers give way, we were near weeping. It is true that Witter was an heathen and a pirate. True it is he held us by force many months in his ship, but I loved that bow-legged, blue-eyed man for his great boldness, his cunning, his skill, and beyond all, for his simplicity. Did he get home all right? Said Dan. I never knew. We saw him hoist sail under the moon track and sail away. I have prayed that he found his wife and children. And what did you do? Sorry, itchy nose. And what did you do? We waited on the marsh till the day. Then I sat by the gold, all tied in an old sail, while Hugh went to Pevensey and D'Aquila sent his horses. Sir Richard crossed hands on his sword hilt and stared downstream through the soft, warm shadows. A whole shipload of gold, said Una, looking at the little golden hind. That's their dinghy. But I'm glad I didn't see the devils. I don't believe they were devils, Dan whispered back. Eh? Said Sir Richard. Witter's father warned him. They were unquestionable devils. One must believe one's father and not one's children. What were my devils then? Dan flushed all over. I only thought, he stammered, I've got a book called The Gorilla Hunters. It's a continuation of Coral Island, sir. Coral Island, written by R.L. Stevenson. Robert Louis Stevenson. No, Coral Island, that's R.M. Ballantyne. I can't remember, one of those two guys. Starts with an R. Wrote Coral Island, not Treasure Island, Coral Island. It's a continuation of Coral Island, sir, and it says that the gorillas, they're big monkeys, you know, were always chewing iron up. Not always, said Una, only twice. They had been reading The Gorilla Hunters in the orchard. Anyhow, they always drummed on their chests, like Sir Richard's ones did, before they went for people, and they built houses and trees too. Ha! Sir Richard opened his eyes. Houses like flat nests did our devils make, where their imps lay and looked at us. I did not see them, I was sick after the fight. But Witter told me, and lo, ye know it also. Wonderful! Were our devils only nest-building apes? Is there no sorcery left in the world? I don't know, said Dan uncomfortably. I've seen a man take rabbits out of a hat, and he told us we could see how he did it if we watched hard. And we did. But we didn't, said Una, sighing, meaning they didn't see it. Oh, there's Puck. The little fellow, brown and smiling, peered between two stems of an ash, nodded, and slid down the bank into the cool beside them. No sorcery, Sir Richard? He laughed and blew on a full dandelion head he had picked. They tell me that Witter's wise iron was a toy. The boy carries such an iron with him. They tell me our devils were apes called gorillas, said Sir Richard indignantly. That is the sorcery of books, said Puck. I warned thee they were wise children. All people can be wise by reading of books. But are the books true? Sir Richard frowned. I like not all this reading and writing. Yes, said Puck, holding the naked dandelion head at arm's length. But if we hang all fellows who write falsely, why did D'Aquila not begin with Gilbert the clerk? He was false enough. Poor false Gilbert. Yet in his fashion he was bold, said Sir Richard. What did he do? Said Dan. He wrote, said Sir Richard. Is the tale meat for children, think you? He looked at Puck. But tell us, cried Dan and Una together. And now we have the chapter end, poem or song. Thorkild's song. There's no wind along these seas, out oars for Stavanger. Forward all for Stavanger, for we must wake the white ash breeze, let fall for Stavanger, a long pull for Stavanger. Oh, hear the benches creak and strain, a long pull for Stavanger. She thinks she smells the Northland rain, a long pull for Stavanger. She thinks she smells the Northland snow, and she's glad as we to go. She thinks she smells the Northland rime, and the dear dark nights of winter time. Her very bolts are sick for shore, and we want it 10 times more. So all you gods that love brave men, send us a 3-reef gale again. Send us a gale and watch us come with close-cropped canvas slashing home. But there's no wind in all these sails, a long pull for Stavanger. So we must wake the white ash breeze, a long pull for Stavanger. Stavanger's the place they were heading for, and he's talking about the fact that they had no wind. That meant they were going to row. A white ash breeze, I think, it's like Shank's pony. means not a pony, but walking on foot. So a white ash breeze is not a breeze, but getting somewhere by using white ash, which is the wood they used for the oars. There you go. And that's the end of that chapter. And the next chapter is called Old Men at Pevensey, and I'm not reading that one today. So we shall see you again next time, remember? So go and look up a little bit about it. See what you can find out about. Is Pevensey a real place? Look that up. Stavanger, Stavanger. Is that a real place? Look that one up too. And maybe even go and colour your hair or do something different just for a change. And I'll see you next time. Oh, don't forget, you can catch up on previous stories on YouTube. I better write that in, hadn't I? There you go. There's the link. Go and check out some of the playlists for previous books over on YouTube. And we'll see you next time. Bye.